Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are fortunate to be able to have this panel with the support of the FIT Diversity Grant, and we will be discussing designing adaptive fashion and accessories and working in the field of adaptive fashion. We are joined tonight by three panelists working in this field. Izzy Camilleri is an award-winning fashion designer who created the adaptive fashion line Is Adaptive, which has a particular focus on adaptive fashion for wheelchair users. Her work has been featured in exhibits, including the Royal Ontario Museum exhibit entitled Fashion Follows Form, Designs for Sitting. Keith Kirkland is an FIT alum and the co-founder of WearWorks, which developed the Wayband, which provides haptic navigation and was used by Simon Wheatcroft when he became the first person who is blind to run the New York City Marathon without sighted assistance. Stephanie Thomas is a disability fashion stylist, a designer, a policymaker, a speaker, and the founder of the Curatable Styling Consultancy. She's a sought-after stylist for actors with disabilities and works with companies to help them better reach out to and serve individuals with disabilities. So tonight we're going to talk to all of our panelists and hear about their experience. Feel free to share any questions you have for them in the chat. We're going to be trying to come back to those questions, and we're also going to start with some questions that we've developed for them. So with each question, we'll cycle through the panelists, and since it's a little difficult to know how to do that online, I'll just say people's names before their responses to make sure that we have everyone. So the first question, and we'll start this question with Izzy, is how did you end up working in the field of adaptive fashion? And can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, sure. I started just by doing some custom work for someone. She had approached me to make a cape for her that would keep her warm while she would take her service dog out. And at that point, that was in 2005, and I had never worked with someone who was a wheelchair user. She was quadriplegic from an injury, so she couldn't move anything from her neck down. And it was a very, very, very eye-opening experience working with her, which led to making more pieces for her. And I just became a sponge learning about her challenges, because I up until that point, I had no idea that people who live with a disability have issues with clothing. And I realized that there are so many. And so in 2009, I started Is Adaptive, and focusing on people who use a wheelchair. Yeah.
Great. And Keith, could you tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing this work and your current work?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, by the way. My name is Keith Kirkland. I'm one of the co-founders at WearWorks. The way I got into this space was pretty windy and curvy. So I started my career as a mechanical engineer. I was pretty set on being, building motorcycles and rocket ships. My realistic engineering life after that didn't quite match when I was in consulting. Decided that I would go back to my original love of art with the engineering twist and go into fashion. That's what brought me to FIT. I did the bachelor's program there. And first, I started with a 1 year program. Happened to graduate in 2008 in the middle of a housing crisis. It's a good time to stay in school and learn a lot more, and I was having a great time. So finished out, got a second bachelor's degree. Went to work in the fashion industry for a while, for a few years. Ended up doing some design work for Calvin Klein, some technical design work for the Sports Sack, and ultimately I ended up, weirdly enough, as a handbag engineer at Coach. Not necessarily ever knowing that that was ever an option for a career. And then ultimately got slightly disenfranchised, like in the fashion space around the consumption and the pollution. Went back to school, got a master's degree in industrial design, this time from Pratt. Spent some time studying at KO in Japan and Royal College of Art in London. And then ultimately I came back. I missed fashion so much that I spent my entire thesis year trying to figure out how can I get back into this way that's deeply aligned with like who I am from the point of view of self. And ultimately I was trying to build a suit that would allow a person to download Kung Fu, and the suit would teach them using only vibrations.
Interesting. And so that interest in haptic is what led you then into the your current work with the Waybands?
Exactly. So, we connected with our team. Me and my co-founders, we were all Pratt students. Kevin and I, Kevin was undergrad. Him and Yang, who was our third co-founder, now advisor, had worked on a project together. Kevin and I had spent some time working at the Met together. And ultimately, Kevin had met a friend of his who was blind and visually impaired, had invited him to Pratt to speak to some of the designers. And, before inclusive design was really a word or a conversation discussion. And he talked about his challenges just finding his way onto campus and finding the building. So Kevin came with this idea of what if we could use haptics for navigation? And for me, I was like, wow, navigation is just a simpler form of movement than Kung Fu. Instead of two-dimensional spaces or three-dimensional spaces, it's two-dimensional. Instead of lots of points all over the body, it's one point. Instead of millimeter accuracy, 5-meter resolution at best for GPS at the moment. And the entire language was pretty simple. You go straight, you turn left, you turn right, wrong way, you've arrived. So we felt that if we could figure out a way of communicating this simple subset of instructions by movement, in the space of navigation, potentially to help a person who's blind or visually impaired navigate that space, then that would open up the world of touch as a communications channel. And touch just happens to be a more accessible form of communication than the other 5 senses because of the resilience of the skin and the size of it. So we were like, why is no one tapped into that? And that was kind of our lead in into the adaptive space was, well, if you're missing a right arm, you can feel on your left arm. If you have no arms, you can feel on your forehead. Like, why don't we use this as a way of communicating information? Because that would open up communications to a lot more people.
Great. That's really interesting. Thank you. Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up working with adaptive fashions and fashion styling specifically, and a little bit about your current work?
Yeah, sure. First, hello to everyone that's joining us and the other panel members. For anyone that's low vision or blind, I am a Black woman. I have on a kind of purplish dark lipstick. I have braid-like twists that are long. I'm wearing a black shirt with a ruffle. It's quarter length, and behind me is a rack with some throws on them that are green and tan, and my wall is white. So my journey, like most people in this space, is meandering. As a person with a disability, I'm a congenital amputee. I do not refer to myself as limb difference because I was actually born without a thumb, without toes in order to help me ambulate. And so bones were taken from different parts of my arms in order to create the toes. And so my experience as a person with a disability viewing adaptive fashion has always been a unique spin for me because I don't quite look disabled enough for people to automatically see it. And then people that are non-disabled don't quite know what box to put me in. So it's always been a unique conversation. With regards to styling, my journey dates back 30 years, honestly. My journey started as a part of a fashion pageant from the Miss America pageant system. My coach simply asked me why I never buttoned my left cuff. I just looked at my hand and I was like, oh, it's because I don't have a right thumb. Something so simple was how my journey started. And this is actually my 30th year. It started in 1992. But it wasn't until a decade later that I developed my disability fashion styling system. I've spent that first decade listening, learning, getting it wrong, trying to convince people with disabilities that they wanted special clothing in special places. And they were like, no, we want to have the shopping experiences that our friends have. We want to make this social. And that's where my styling system came from. I started reaching out to different companies in around 2002, 2003. And they were just like, oh, that's really cute. Thank you. Pat me on the head, and I never hear from them again. And that really helped me develop something that I see as the liaison between where the fashion industry is and where it must inevitably go to be more inclusive. And that's my award-winning disability fashion styling system. It has 3 principles. Clothing should be accessible, easy to put on and take off. Clothing should be smart for your health, medically safe, which is something that people often leave out because clothing for many people is not medically safe. It's either easy to put on and cute or cute, and medically safe, but generally not all three. And the final portion of that is fashionable. It should be something that the wearer loves and that the wearer enjoys being a part of. And styling for me allows me to pull amazing pieces from designers like Izzy, from Is Adaptive, as well as going into any store and making sure I check those 3 boxes to dress actors here in Los Angeles.
Great. Wonderful. So going on to our next question. I'd love to learn more from all of you about how you work with individuals with disabilities to learn and understand their unique needs and find adaptive fashion solutions that work well for each individual and that serve many individuals at the same time. And Stephanie, I know you work as a stylist, so that's certainly something that you're working with individuals all the time. So if you could start us off with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really important conversation, and I appreciate you including me in it, because a lot of times the conversation stops at design. But as someone that's on the other side of that, I hear from both the designers and the clients. So every conversation for me is different. I start with questions. I have what I call like a dressing solution, a quiz that I have everyone take. And I start with the right questions. Do you have a disability? Do you have a chronic illness? I start with questions that will take me on a path to help, make that a unique experience. And part of what we deal with is that most clothing for people with disabilities is not in stores. And my clients want to be a part of that experience. Sure, there are some clients that just, I do pulls for them. I go online and I bring them basically a store to their home. But then there are clients that want to know how to do this on their own. So I have 3 ways of doing it. I start off with listening. That's the number one thing that I feel like people miss when it comes to styling, especially because although fashion is not very human centered, styling is not always human centered, because most people just want to go, okay, I need this to look good. Even when styling for e-commerce, I find that people do not style and consider that, oh, someone else with a similar disability may want to purchase this. You can't just cut the butt out of pants and say, this is going to work. Because what happens when someone tries to purchase it? So I listen. That's step number 1. Step number 2, I have them take the quiz. Step number 3, I remind them that styling is an art and a science. So we get the tissue, we get the water, we take breaks when we're shopping in person. I just make it as easy as possible for them to be able to understand their body type, understand how to dress it, and to do it with as much dignity and independence and fun as possible.
Great. Thank you very much. And Keith, can you talk a little bit about how you worked with individuals with disabilities when you were refining your product and designing for them?
Yeah, when we started the company, the first person that I met who was blind was our blind advisor, Marcus Engel. I never had the experience of blindness in my life. My uncle had cerebral palsy growing up, so I had the experience of disability up close, but not blindness in particular. And so what we did is we just listened a lot as well, like, just to echo those thoughts, like at the end of the day, we have a certain skill set. And, usually the generation of the ideas of that skill set come from our own heads, but by transforming ourselves more into like a conduit or a faucet to take the ideas from what the community was saying directly, what their challenges were around navigation. Like, hey, when I go out, like, I'm scared. Like people grab me like I need help, and then I turn around and I get disoriented and I forget which way I'm facing. Like they talked about the issues, the challenges. The average person who's blind or visually impaired takes 2.5 routes from their home daily, right? The supermarket and the pharmacy. Like you can imagine that life shrinks a lot. And they talk really about this period because most people that we met, like most people aren't born blind. They become blind in life. Like, this line of ability that we, think is so typical and so normal is so fragile. I'm just recovering from a broken hand, after falling off my skateboard in Romania like 2 months ago. I was one-handed for 2 months and I'm still recovering. So the line of ability kind of shifts really easily. And for us, we just got that info from them and was like, hey, what do you need here? oh, it would be great if they could do this. Hey, you know what? I want to walk routes around my house. I want to be able to walk in a circle. Oh, a navigation app can't put you in a circle because they take you to an address, right? You know, and then the biggest part was is that the audio navigation piece, it worked for most people who are blind or visually impaired, but you're blind, your ears are your eyes. So like having something constantly talking in your ears while you need your ears to keep yourself safe and pay attention to traffic is like looking at a phone while walking down the street and not paying attention to what's going on around you as a sighted person, right? So we were like, hey, would this be like? What would this experience feel like if we could offset this and put it into touch? And that's where we saw really that people got really excited about it. Because when we first opened up, our original goal was let's build a better way to navigate. Looking at a phone doesn't make any sense, but it's the best way we've figured out so far in life. Let's do something better than that. And I would spend, you know, just with sighted tourists, like, hey, try a new way to travel without having to stare at a map and look like a tourist, right? You know, and it was so challenging. But the minute we started talking to the blind and visually impaired community, like I was like, navigation is inherently visual, and that sucks if you can't see. It was just a very instantaneous feel for what it is that we're doing. And I felt like we fell into this synergy where we saw the blind use case as our ultimate possibility of what we would be able to do if it all worked out great. Like if, like, you know, maybe we would get there, maybe one day. It would be cool if, you know, like, and by switching the whole conversation and starting from that point of view, like we helped the first person who was blind run a New York City Marathon without sighted assistance 2 years after we started the company. And we did it with less than $50,000, right? You know, and so it's like we started in a place where it was like, oh, we were here. And I feel like that big piece has just been constantly being a conduit, constantly being open. Hello at WhereWorks, our email channel. People write us all the time. It's like, hey, wouldn't it be great if it could do this? If we could do this? Have you ever thought about that? Can we talk about this? And then we'll like jump on a phone call with them and like, yeah, let's talk about it. So that openness, I think, you know, and that listening. And then of course, as designers, you don't put everything that you find into the design. You select, you distill, you make choices, you know, based off of the data, based off of the people, but also too based off of your own personal vision and where you're trying to take this. Because that part is super important for us as designers. We're not just listening to what people say and then copying that. We're adding what we believe is our vision of that future embedded with that information so that what comes out is both authentic to us and the community that we're serving.
That's great, thanks. And Izzy, can you talk a little bit about how you work with individuals with disabilities to learn about their needs and to make sure that you're offering fashions that work for a range of different needs?
Yeah. Well, originally, with my first client, um, I, well, like Kirk and is it Kirk? No, not Kirk, Keith. Um, and Stephanie said, listening, like, you know, that's key. And so I just started listening to the challenges and the things that my first client wasn't able to wear or purchase and the reasons why. So for her, she was paralyzed from her neck down, so she could not use her arms to get dressed. She couldn't obviously get up and tuck a coat under her chair. All of these things that I just never, I just never thought about. And so finding solutions for these issues, even the fact that she was sitting most of the day, when design clothes are basically designed for a standing frame. And when we sit down, everything kind of gets messed up. So, think of a pair of jeans, for example. When we sit down, they kind of cut us in our gut. They ride down at the back and they're really not comfortable, but an able-bodied person has the freedom to stand up and walk around or even adjust but for someone who's paralyzed or someone who has another kind of disability like cerebral palsy or MS, they're kind of stuck in these clothes until they get out of their chair. So after working with my first client, and I worked with a second, and it was between those two that really propelled me forward into designing a collection. And because I I thought, okay, where do I start? And so I Googled like wheelchair clothes because I didn't know where to start looking.
Mhm.
And all I saw was clothing that was geared to the elderly and for people living in long-term care facilities. And these two women who were my first two clients were very young. Um, the second client I started working with, she became disabled from a sports accident, and she was also paralyzed from her neck down. And I found a statistic that's a little dated now. It's a little bit different, but different. Certain the aging population has skewed this statistic, but it's still valuable to say that, like 10 years ago, 84% of people in Canada, 84% of people that became paralyzed was from car accidents and sports, and they're between the ages of 18 and 34. And then the remainder, 16%, was generally the elderly. And a lot of times it was just from a bad fall. So going back to that 84% of people, they're between the ages of 18 and 34, they don't want to wear stuff that their grandmother is wearing or stuff that they're going to wear in a hospital. They want to look like their friends and they want to look like their peers and they want to go to a job interview feeling their absolute best and not being forced to wear clothes, for example, that are too big because those are easier to get on, or just, accommodating, or even just, wearing sweats all day because those are also easier to get on. So I decided to just start with wardrobe basics, things that we all have in our wardrobe and things that are also easy to style. So, blue jeans or even black jeans, dress pants, shirt, coat, just because there was literally nothing. And I started the company in 2009. And so, the coats are designed to follow the line of a seated person. So the coat actually has dimension and it's
Mhm.
bottomless. So you're able to put it on while you're seated in your chair. Like if you can't stand up to put it on, you need to put it on while you're sitting. So people would often just end up wearing a short jacket because they didn't have to deal with the bottom half. But the problem with that, especially here in Canada, and I know New York has similar weather, it gets really cold in the wintertime. There's snow that would, fall on their lap, rain falling on their lap and getting soaking wet. So this coat covers your lap, but it only goes to the length of the back at the back. So you're not ending up with this big puddle of fabric either behind you or in front of you. And then pants are also cut to follow the line of a seated person. So pressure has been moved. So when we sit down, our pants kind of go like that. But my pants, the front is kind of 90-degree, and then the back is we've got more length in the back so that it reaches your waist at the back instead of pulling down. And so they're just comfortable. So that was, just really observing, like not only listening, but then observing and seeing what happens to clothes when we sit down and what could make them easier for a person to get on and what things can I do. So for people that have dexterity issues, even doing buttons can be a challenge. So finding solutions for closures and things like that. So yeah, always listening and always listening. Sometimes, people will tell me, my grandma always does this to my clothes. And, sometimes those ideas are fantastic. But I always, too, then have to think of, what is going to work for the majority? Because I can't just do all these little hacks for individuals, because our online store, we sell inventory. So our clothes are kind of taken to a point where if you do need those little special hacks that make your life easier, we've kind of taken the clothes to a certain point, and then you can take it to a tailor in your hometown, to add a zipper here or a hook here or whatever. Or even sometimes, people might have different leg lengths. you can just hem, you can hem them differently. Yeah, so that's, there's a lot to absorb, and I'm continually learning and listening. And one more thing I'll say is just when Stephanie was talking about health, we've recently developed a pant that's seamless at the back. And the reason for that is because a lot of wheelchair users can suffer from pressure sores, which are very similar to bed sores that the elderly get. So the issue is the base of the spine hitting that center seam of a jean, for example, and that seam is thick and dense. So what happens is the bone penetrates the skin, and when that happens, it's a pretty serious infection. And if it's not treated or taken care of in a timely manner, you can get blood poisoning, and you can die from it. So it's a very, very serious issue that a lot of people have to continue to monitor all the time, every day. So these pants lower the risk of pressure sores.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to talk about, we are an educational institution, and a lot of students are interested in working in the design industry, and the fashion industries as stylists or designers. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for audience members who are interested in working in the field of adaptive fashion, or integrating this into their work in other areas of fashion, integrating this sort of sensibility and inclusive ideals and approaches.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, we'll start with Izzy for this one, sure.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing, and I get a lot of students reaching out to me for help and answers, and I actually don't like to give answers because I feel like you need to go and do your own research. You need to go talk to people. You need to see the customer that you want to serve, and you need to talk to that person. You can look at my website, you can get inspired by what I've done, but I developed this through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And, like, I asked all the right questions and maybe a lot of wrong questions. I don't know, but I had to, get my hands dirty and get in there. And then the other thing that I would say is that I think it's a really great way to enter this arena is also by thinking of universal design and thinking of things that are not only for people that live with a disability, but for everybody. So, making clothes that are easier to get on, using closures that are easy, putting a little loop on a zipper so someone who lacks dexterity can just use the loop to pull the zipper up and down. Little things that can make anybody's life easier. So I think thinking universally helps kind of broaden your audience as well. And then, yeah, just, really do your research and understand who your customer is and what their needs are. Because, again, going back to health, you can actually hurt someone if you don't do it correctly. So, you need to understand, as much as you can. And I think just continue learning.
Great. So Stephanie, what would your advice be, especially coming from the stylist point of view?
I'm just enjoying this panel myself, by the way. I just want to tell the other panelists that. A lot of thoughts come to my mind. I'm going to kind of pick up where Izzy left off. You should listen to your potential client. You should have an understanding, even like Keith said, of what your aesthetic is, what you are trying to create, because your clients come to you because you have something to offer them. For me, what's really important as a person with a disability is jewelry and footwear are my two nemesis. I don't even deal with buttons anymore. We don't even speak. So my nemesis are fine jewelry and footwear. So I developed a jewelry collection with cut and clarity that is easy to put on and take off. It checks all the boxes of my styling system. And then when I go footwear shopping, what I would love to see, what is missing for me before we even get to the product is getting the product in the store. So if you are a student, if you are someone that works in the field, why is it that in 2022 I can't go to the store and buy this beautiful adaptive or universally designed or human-centered design garment or footwear for myself or for my clients? Number two, I think the most important thing before I said even we get to the product again is having an understanding of disability culture. I find that a lot of people want to gloss over it. I'm even finding now in the fashion industry, there's this thing, well, just start with accessible and that'll take you beyond, start with disability, because with disability is innovation. The idea of many of the things that we're doing right now, what we're doing right now has now opened up employment for so many other people that used to ask for accommodations with their work, but their jobs just wouldn't do it. And 2020 taught us that, so everyone around the globe needs an accommodation right now for the most part, right? Most people needed an accommodation and we were able to get it. So you have to engage with disability culture, not just following people. I don't need an ally. If you walk up to me and tell me you're my ally, that means nothing to me. I need humans that see me as an equal, not as someone that you need to care for and help. Are there people that need caring for and help that are non-disabled? Absolutely. Are there people with chronic illnesses that need that? Absolutely. Are there injured people that need that? So the idea of needing help is not something unique and exclusive to disability. The next thing is forget about the lexicon for a minute. People stop at what word to say, how to say it, when to say it. The reason that you're not sure about the lexicon is often because you haven't engaged the culture. So when you engage any culture, wherever you travel, or if you're new to skateboarding or new to dance or new to any type of specific culture, you're going to learn the jargon. You're going to learn the lexicon from interacting. Once that's down, the next thing I would suggest is to think about humans wearing the clothing, the footwear, the accessories. We need to think that actual humans are putting this on. And from a stylist perspective, if you're doing e-com, you're going to want to remember or even learn, what do you need when you're talking to producers? Make sure that there are accessible restrooms. Make sure that people with disabilities don't have to get out of their chair and be carried upstairs because the person has booked a shoot in a place that's inaccessible. Make sure that you know enough to advocate. Make sure that you understand that when they're going on the paper to do the photo shoot, that they maybe need to turn their wheels around backwards. Maybe there's a special way they need to come in. Maybe you tape down the paper afterwards. Do due diligence. Ask questions, play around, be curious, and listen to the end user.
Thanks. Keith, do you want to go ahead and talk about what you would say to people who are interested in working in the area?
Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to follow all of that. But, I think that the biggest piece is that, like, I don't know, I feel like you have to start from a point of view of selfishness. And I know normally selfishness is a terrible thing, but you have to start from the place that you derive interest and joy from. I mean, there are a billion things you can do to help the world move forward, like climate change, plant trees, like racial inequity, health equity, whatever, food. There's a billion things you could do. And if you try to do all those things to save the world, you'll get burnt out. Like, you don't need to do all of that. That's why we have 7 billion other people here, because like all of us are going to do our own part. So like pick the lane that really like jives with you. Like I found this lane of touch, communication, fashion, and engineering that just happened to, in hindsight, fit my background, but only because I was following my joy all the way through it, which led me here. So I feel that like, innovation starts from happiness. It starts from, because like if your cup is empty, you don't have enough to give innovation to the world. So it's like I think that like maintaining whatever that filling of your own personal cup is a super duper important part. And then the other thing I want to talk about is kind of, I was writing down some stuff, like niche markets, right? Like 3D printing made basically, mass production, not necessarily unnecessary, but like, not the only option that you had to do, right? And that's why disability tech, I mean, let's face it, that's a reason a lot of disability stuff didn't happen because, we have a billion people we could press like go on the same size and like, sell to everyone, right? But now with that customization came in to this ability to customize things, and I remember when people started like doing like 3D printed, like prosthetics, like and creating communities around that. So it's like now we're in a space where, this idea of niche markets, right? And they talk about the disabilities community is basically like, 1 billion plus people. It's like basically a market bigger than the size of China. But the thing is that you can't address the whole market with one solution, right? So the way you tackle it is like you have to tackle it through like really like dominating niche markets. Now there's this book called Crossing the Chasm that talks all about marketing and your early innovators and your majority and your laggers and how did you get from here to here. Most companies die in this chasm that they call, right? But the way you get across the chasm is that, because the early majority will only buy from the market leader. So what you do is you pick a market that's small enough that you can actually be the leader in. Then you dominate that market. And now you walk in with the dominance of that market and trust into the larger adjacent market. And it's already been proven by this market to be oftentimes more than what the majority market needs for it to do. Like no one needs their waistband to help them as a blind person run a marathon, right? That is not the typical use case of our device. Most people are like, hey, I need to get to like the post office, so like want to go hang out with my friends at this new bar, right? So by doing that Jordan use case, like, all of a sudden it's like, hey, I don't jump that high and I don't play basketball that well, but like I know if I'm wearing these sneakers, like I want to be as best as I can be with it. So that ability of like look at the market size that you're aiming for, because everyone's like bigger market, bigger market, bigger market, and I'm just like no, like when I talk to people and they're like, hey, I'm like that market's too big. Like tell me a market that you can actually get. Tell me a market that you can achievely reach out to dominate that space in. So I think that like when we start pairing like innovative technologies, innovative products with innovative business models, because like right now, for example, we just opened up the Wayband for free for a year because we realized that like with all the technology that we're developing, we have companies like Airbnb and Google and Waymo that are interested in the technology. So why not subsidize the accessibility product instead of making people pay for it with the B2B, because we wouldn't have built this product if we weren't trying to build it for people with accessibility needs, right? So now we can build whole new business models that aren't about like, philanthropy. It's like, hey, where does Siri come from? Where did audiobooks come from? Right? How many blind organizations get like a cut of what audiobooks make right now? What if that was built into the model? What could we do? And I think like that is the possibility, like build technology in accessible spaces and products in accessible spaces, license them out to the rest of the world at a premium, make them free for the people that need it. So I don't know, my personal thoughts on the whole space.
That's great. Thank you very much. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that in recent years, adaptive fashion has been in the spotlight a bit more. Some major brands have launched adaptive lines or have started talking more about inclusive design generally. And I'm curious what you think about that, how it's influenced your own work at all, and what you see as the advantages and disadvantages of these bigger brands coming in and starting to talk about adaptive fashion. So Keith, maybe you can start us off with this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think that, and like grassroots is great, like that builds the movement, that builds the energy, that keeps it authentic. But at the end of the day, like, if it doesn't go mainstream, it doesn't stick. And so I think that like corporations coming in, they're showing the validity of the space to what might be, limited to a talk or a classroom in most cases. They're putting dollars behind. And now, how authentically are they going after it? What does it mean behind them going after it? Those are different conversations we can have, and I'm sure like, they'd be pretty interesting. But the bigger part is that like, how is this moving the conversation forward? It's making it a conversation. Like for example, in my particular space in the world of haptics, haptic means touch. No one knows that. So when we were like, hey, we do haptics, people were like, what the heck are you talking about? Right. And it's like, there's an education piece that like, if you don't even realize that there's a problem, you can't even think about how to solve the problem. So I think that, like by building this in, because someone's going to look and be like, why is Louis Vuitton doing adaptive fashion? Like someone's going to jump into that and look into that. A customer that might not have been at that grassroots organization that might not be here, like listening to this talk, right? And I think that at the end of the day, we benefit from that overall awareness as a generality. But I'll let I'll let you guys dig in a little bit more. I'm sure you have more to say.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you, Keith. I do think that it is all part of what we need in order. It's part of the puzzle, right? You need it all. I'm going to start with positive. So, yes, it's amazing that Gucci and Louis Vuitton and other luxury brands and even, fast fashion or designer brands like Tommy Hilfiger have taken the lead and have become a part of this. In addition, I will say an area of improvement for me is if you're going to be skims, acknowledge slick chicks. That's all I'm saying. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to build your brand on another brand, as much integrity that you can do that with would be great. I know you're like, she's living in the clouds. This is business, but it doesn't have to be. You asked my opinion. So this is how I think about it. I think instead of taking from these brands that have been doing the work, Izzy's one of my favorites because I've been able to put clients in her pieces confidently for years. And I feel very comfortable with that. There are other brands that do amazing work. I like the idea of the partnerships because the partnerships will get not just disabled people in the space, but people that actually understand the market. They've been doing this work, like you said, keep grassroots. And then the last positive thing that I'll say about that is that anybody can become a person with a disability at any moment. What does that actually mean? And should that be something that people should be afraid of? Or should we just make clothing so human-centered that anyone can wear it? Izzy and I sometimes, we chat about this, is the idea that clothing, like you were saying, should be good for sitting and standing, because even if you ambulate standing up, you're still going to sit down. And so why shouldn't we have clothing that is just smart like that just helps people navigate life with as much ease and as much comfort as possible? So I'm pro businesses getting involved. It's not a niche market, and people should be excited about it because you could be designing something you may need one day. And how would you want to look?
Great, thanks. And Izzy, how about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my colleagues here kind of said it all. A lot of what Keith said really resonated with me. And let's see, to top all that off, I think so. I'm in total agreement with what they said. And I think the good thing is having these bigger brands enter the arena is really shining a light on it and making it, something to look at if you didn't know that a lot of people just don't even know that it's a problem or that there is a problem. So I think that the awareness that it's raising is really, really good. As a small company, it can be scary at the same time when these bigger brands are coming in and you just feel like they're going to crush you. But again, like what Keith said, like the pants I was mentioning earlier, the seamless back ones, when I figured out how to do it, I had people asking me for years and years and years and years to come up with a seamless back pant. And I just did not think it was possible because that back seam is integral to a pair of pants. And so it was actually at the beginning of COVID that when the world stopped and I was thinking, what the hell's going on? I didn't know what was happening, but I was at home and I thought, I think I'm going to try to crack this. And I did. And then when I did, I thought I need to protect this because my stuff has been ripped off so many times, and I was not able to patent or protect that um, technology. So because you can't patent anything if it's been on the market for over a year. So I decided to look into patent protection before I even put it on the market. And so now, again, like what Keith mentioned, I can license this technology to other brands. Thanks for the clap, Keith. So, and it is something that I am talking to bigger brands about, and I am developing a standing version of it as well. So it's a pant that anybody can wear. It looks really, really awesome, and so new and innovative at the same time. So I'm really excited about it. But the fact that, I can talk to these brands and help them become more inclusive, because that's one thing that I've had two conversations about, where they just want to be more inclusive and they want to do it right. And I have seen other brands that just kind of dive in and they don't do their due diligence, and they don't, um, do it right, or they just, have a person with a disability in their ads, but the clothes that they've got on that person is not really something that they should be wearing, or something, where it's going to get all caught in their wheels, or it's not safe. Um, anyway, so it's really important for these brands, if they are going to enter, like I said before, even to a student, you got to do your research. You don't want to hurt someone. And you want to be inclusive, like coming from the heart. And yeah, that was another thing, Keith. Sorry, I really enjoyed your little spiel there. Just about, it's not about being selfish. It's about being happy in what you're doing. And because if you're not, you're going to burn out pretty quickly. So, doing it with integrity and doing it from a place of, even compassion. And for me, that's the first thing that kicked in when I started to work with my first person. Was I had no idea, the issues that people with disability face on a daily, on an hourly basis, and I just live my life, like I don't have to think about any of this stuff. So I just became so much more compassionate and aware, and respect for people that live with a disability. So, it has to come from the right place. It's not just about ticking boxes.
I think that's really interesting too, what you say about, the fact that developing that pant has then moved into developing one for people who do sit and stand, because almost everybody in their workday has sometimes when they're sitting and sometimes when they're standing. And so that's definitely one of these things where the original idea, the innovation might have come from the idea of having it be adaptive clothing, but it's an innovation that could serve a lot of people really well.
Like Le
Yeah,
Mans
I
race
like,
car drivers, 24
yeah,
hours
or
sitting in the car, like
Yeah.
it's pretty
yeah,
intense. So,
motorbike riders, you know. Yeah, so that what's kind of interesting about this pant is that it has now come from a design based on disability, but now it inspired a more universal design,
That's
where it's
great.
usually the other way.
Definitely, yeah.
Hmm.
So there's a question from the audience, so I'm going to jump over to that. So the question is, aside from user groups and listening, how are your companies employing people with disabilities, or are you able to? And how does this change your workflow? And is there anybody who would like to respond to that first? Keith.
yeah, I'm happy to tag in a little bit. And so, we've always sourced talent kind of like wherever talent would find us. And oftentimes, so initially when we started about 2 years ago, we had someone who was in accessibility. He was blind and visually impaired. Basically, he looked at our website and he was like, "Hey, your website is not accessible." And we're like, "Oh, that's us." Because we're, building products for people who are blind. He was like, "You want to talk about it?" I'm like, "Of course." And then basically we talked for like a month, and then ultimately we ended up hiring him. And so like he worked with us for almost 2 years, over 2 years, building out all of the initial product. And he was blind and visually impaired, and actually syndrome as well, so hearing aids. But from our point of view, we had to do almost nothing outside of every now and again, like make things in like better contrast to a lot for his visual impairment. Like he ran the entire software development team, you know, a team of like 4 or 5 people. He had 25 years of back-end development experience. He could also code back-end. So, you know, from our point of view, it was kind of like, and he was building all of the tech. So, it, like, the accessibility was like, can I use it? You know, and of course, like, you know, every blindness is different. It's like a spectrum, a visual impairment from like, you know, black blind to like total, I can see perfectly, right? So, you know, everyone can see it's different. So, you know, he can't base it all on his one type of blindness, but, you know, it's a good marker and it's a good indicator. And I think also too, like, it's super positive, you know, from because like we would go into meetings and like with people who are blind and visually impaired with organizations, and we'd have someone jump on the line and they'd be like, well, there's no way you can do that because I can't do that as a person who's blind. And he was like, I'm blind and I built it. And yeah, I used it last week. It works perfectly fine. Here's how you do it. And then they were like, so it was almost kind of like just from him being able to speak from personal experience, you know, you know, like 50% of the rebuttals that showed up that like, because the thing that you have to realize is that, and is because I feel like the disabilities community is a very hard audience to like appease and to like you know like get on your side from a product point of view, right? But the thing that you have to recognize is that you know for like you know 100 or 1,000 or more years that like they basically been sold a bunch of bull crap, you know what I'm saying? And essentially at this point just really ridiculously tired of hearing the nonsense. So you have to get through a bit of walls, you know, that are like protective, you know, like because of the way people have kind of like preyed on people in the disabilities community. But like if you can get through those walls very clearly and very cleanly, you are like you're the go-to. You become the go-to for because you know, like once you have that shop that you know has all the stuff that you like, or like that brand that like makes headphones exactly the way that you want to listen to music, you don't when those break, you go buy new ones. You don't buy a new brand. You know what I'm saying? You don't go experiment with something else, you know, like and so like if you can capture that audience, you really can capture them. I think that's the big part of, you know, building within having people in a community that are part of the building process. Super valuable.
Thanks. And Stephanie, I saw you also had a comment on that question.
Oh, like Izzy going into her new technology, we're working on new technology right now. It's basically pouring my years of experience, hands-on experience with people with various disabilities into AI, and creating an algorithm based on my work through a dressing styling system, and then taking that AI and literally making it a SaaS model for B2B businesses that are interested in making their AI more inclusive. And to this end, I have started searching for people with disabilities to really help develop this. And I'm working with some great consultants with disabilities, which is great because their disability is different from mine. I have people who are neurodivergent. I have all kinds of people that are helping with this. And I'm not a large company right now. We're still in fundraising, especially to develop this product. But what it's taught me as a person with a disability running a company and hiring others, I have to be more discriminating. Keith kind of mentioned something that it's the person that they wound up hiring after a month was skilled. He had a skill set that they could utilize. And for me, oftentimes I find that I have to say no more than yes, because sometimes people just say, hey, I like clothes, I like styling, I want to do this. But because we're not a not-for-profit, I need people who are skilled in the area, which is why I'm here today. Because anyone that has a disability that's in this space and it's like, hey, I understand garment construction, I understand styling, I'd love to, you know, be a part of what you're doing. Those are the people that I'm looking for. People that are disabled and non-disabled that have are connected to the community. And what I like to say when I'm normally speaking is, it shouldn't take anyone 3 hours to put on a jacket. And that may sound like hyperbole, but I've witnessed it myself with my dad, who went from non-disabled to disabled. Just that idea of not wanting to ask for help, wanting to do things on his own. And so that's my perspective with it. And I love to see companies that do both, because I think we can learn so much from each other.
Mm.
Great. So we only have about 3 more minutes left. So just briefly, I'd love to hear what you see as the future of adaptive design, either for yourself or for the field more generally. And I'd love to know what everyone sort of sees as that future that they would like to see. And Izzy, I'll go ahead and start with you for this one.
Well, I think that the category of adaptive clothing is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that you know, people that live with a disabilities voices are going to be heard more and more. And you know, we're going to constantly learn from them to understand what's missing, and you know, there's so many aspects. There's so much white space of untouched areas that need addressing. So there's going to be a long, you know, list of things that can be created to a demographic that in the past just hasn't been heard. And one thing that always used to bug me when I would read articles, like a few years ago, there's a lot of, you know, media attention coming, and I was involved in a lot of interviews around it. And then the title would be "Designers Ignoring People with Disabilities," you know, for, you know, whatever. And I was thinking, well, no, I don't like to call it ignoring. Like I was a fashion designer, like my background, which I didn't mention, like I used to do fashion collections and high-end collections, and I wasn't ignoring people with disabilities. I just didn't know a problem existed. And so, you know, I used to really bug me because we're not ignoring. You just, if you don't know a problem exists, you just don't deal with it.
Yeah.
So I think that now we are understanding that there is this problem that needs to be addressed. And so I think now it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. That's
Okay,
what I
great.
think.
Keith, how about you? What do you see as the future?
Yeah, you know, I think that, and I've heard this from somewhere, and I can't remember where I pulled it from, but I love the concept. Like, I think that in the future, like adaptive is just going to be synonymous with personalization. And it's like, hey, you know what? Like, I don't like wearing things around my neck with Velcro because I have locks, and it's a very painful experience when the wrong side of the Velcro snags my hair, right? You know, so anything that's Velcro related, stay away from the top of my head, right? You know, that's a personal preference. Just, you know, for me, it's ridiculously inconvenient, right? But, you know, like now there, you know, like outside of bike helmets, I don't have that problem in so many particular realms, right? And so I think that we all have things around how we want to engage with objects, you know, textures, you know, things like that, like how things feel, how things fit, how things work. And I think that all, at the end of the day, it's personalization. So I think that the big piece that we can do as designers is, you know, and I think Adobe has mastered it, where it's like, hey, how do you get the paintbrush tool? Oh, you type B, or you go to the menu, or you go to that little box in the corner, or you type from the bar and pull it. Like there are 20 different ways to get the brush tool, right? And I think that like as we start to think about what adaptive design is, when there are 20 different ways for, you know, different people to access your product in whatever way makes sense for them, like we have the visual map too, because you might want to see the map. We have an audio component to the map because you might want to listen, but you know what? We're leading with touch, and like that's our value proposition. So we have that too. We didn't make a black map only that only you can feel. We could have done that, but we wanted to make it more open, not necessarily less. So I think that like those are kind of the opportunities in the space to really transform mass personalization at such a scale that it you're not even talking about disability. You're just talking about a person and like their preferences or not.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie, how about you? What do you see as that future?
I don't think you can design for someone you don't see, and I don't think you can see someone you don't value as a customer, period. And I think that yes, customization and personalization is definitely 100% the future, where it's not a conversation. However, in order for people that really need to not take 3 hours to put on a jacket or have to explain the needs that they have, I think they cannot be left out of the conversation. We cannot be left out of that conversation. But I think the future of adaptive has always been human-centered, where we just think about how we can make things easier for humans. So I agree with what both Keith and Izzy has said. And we often ignore the fact that in the 1980s, when they were promoting and marketing with people with disabilities in Target ads, in Walmart ads, this stuff isn't new. The only reason it has not become something that people just do innately is because how we view disability. And we're only as strong as our weakest link. And perception is reality, that people with disabilities are the weakest link, not innovators, not people that add to the conversation. So I'm going to always be the person that says you cannot just have the designs and all of that without considering audiences, i.e. Black women in beauty products, Black women in hair products, understanding what Rihanna did and how she changed the game just by seeing people. So yes, design, but you have to see the people that you are designing for.
Great, thank you. And that's a wonderful ending to our presentation. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the audience for joining us. This has been a great conversation, and I really loved hearing from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thanks for
everybody.
having us. Yeah.
Thank you.
And if the panelists could just stay on for one moment as we end.